Adriana Testa cried out as her boyfriend, the defendant, assaulted her. These are the words she cried out as he hit her not once, but twice in the head with a hammer. Adriana's cries were for help. Our cries today are for justice. I am Leanna McMiniman, and I, along with my co-counsel, Alexa Kleska, represent the people of the state of Lone Star. And while we represent the state today, we are also here to share with you a story of domestic violence that occurred on June 14, 2014. We are here to present you with the testimony and evidence that shows these crimes. The testimony and evidence that shows the defendant, Peter Seeger, is guilty of first-degree assault and criminal domestic violence. Members of the jury, one moment, Your Honor. Members of the jury, assault and CDV, those are the charges against the defendant today. We are here as the state to show you that the defendant has committed these crimes beyond a reasonable doubt. We are here to explain to you what beyond a reasonable doubt is. Beyond a reasonable doubt does not mean beyond all doubt or beyond a mere doubt. It means beyond all doubts which are reasonable. And again, as the state, we bear that burden. But in today's case, we welcome it. Members of the jury, at the end of today's trial, my co-counsel will come before you and explain how the evidence and testimony presented to you relates to the charges against the defendant and shows we have met our burden of beyond a reasonable doubt. Further, we will also present you with the testimony of several witnesses. You will hear from the victim, Adriana Testa. She will take the stand today and tell you that she was living with the defendant last June as his girlfriend. She'll tell you that, yes, while their relationship had taken a negative turn, she could never see coming the events of June 14, 2014. She'll tell you how that night she was just getting ready for work while the defendant was trying to hang a painting. She'll tell you how the defendant asked for her help to hang that painting, asked her to hold it up for him. But as you will see, she accidentally dropped it. This painting of Elvis Presley on black velvet was a prized possession of the defendant's. So you might understand the defendant getting a little angry. You could probably overlook a little yelling. But what the defendant chose to do instead was assault Adriana Testa. He chose to take a hammer in his hand and hit her not once, but twice in the head with that hammer, leaving Adriana seriously injured and crying out for help. The next witness you'll hear from today will be Dr. Derek Shepard. Dr. Shepard is the doctor who examined Adriana Testa in the emergency room last June. He is a very experienced and qualified doctor. He's been practicing medicine for 20 years and has abundant experience working in emergency situations. So he'll take the stand today and testify that when it comes to serious injuries, he's seen it all. And then Dr. Shepard will testify to the seriousness of the injuries Adriana sustained last June. He'll tell you how she arrived in the emergency room with injuries ranging from scrapes on her hands and knees to 2 serious head wounds. And then the evidence. The evidence will further show that those 2 head wounds were consistent in size and shape to a hammer, corroborating Ms. Testa's account of violence that occurred last June. Now, you will also likely hear from 2 witnesses that the defense will call today. We expect they will call the defendant, Peter Seeger, as well as the eyewitness, Jordan Kravitz. If the defendant takes the stand today, we expect that he'll tell you on the night of June 14, 2014, he never asked Adriana to help hang that painting. He never hit her with the hammer, and that she made up the entire story you'll hear today. But members of the jury, the defendant will not be able to deny those 2 head wounds on Ms. Testa's head, consistent in size and shape to a hammer. The defendant will not be able to deny that when the police arrived at his home last June, he was hiding, hammer in hand, as they tended to Ms. Testa, covered in blood. Finally, you will hear from Jordan Kravitz. We expect Mr. Kravitz to take the stand today and give you an account of what he heard and saw, as he is the only eyewitness to the events that happened last June. We expect Mr. Kravitz to tell you that he heard Adriana crying out for help. And so he walked to his front door, looked out into the street, and what he saw was Adriana Adriana fleeing her home, running from the defendant as he chased after her, hammer in hand. Members of the jury, we expect Mr. Kravitz to tell you that he heard Adriana cry out for help that night, so he called the police. And we also expect Mr. Kravitz will likely take the stand today and tell you that Adriana told him a different story a few weeks after the night of June 14th. We expect that he'll tell you Adriana came to his home that night and said, "Peter never hit me. I don't want him to go to jail." But Ms. Testa will take this very stand here today, and she'll explain to you, yes, she did change her story, but only after she found out she was pregnant with the defendant's child. She'll take the stand today and tell you, "I may have had a change of story in a moment of desperation, but I never had a change of heart." Members of the jury, Adriana's cries were for help. Our cries today are for justice. Do not let those cries for help, those cries for justice, be in vain. Listen to the testimony, review diligently the evidence to be presented to you, and at the end of the day, see that the evidence will only allow you to do one thing: find Peter Seeger guilty of first-degree assault and criminal domestic violence. Thank you. Defense.
Your Honor, may it please the court. Members of the jury, you have a tough job today. And there will be a lot of information presented to you. There will be witnesses, evidence, the prosecution's theory, and our case. And this is because you have the unique job as the triers of fact and credibility in our justice system. This means that you determine what all of this information really means. And it is our job as lawyers to help you understand what you're being shown. And what you will see today is that all this case really boils down to are inconsistencies. And when you mix intoxication with instability, you get an inconsistent story. And justice cannot stand on inconsistencies. So today, I want you to ask yourself some questions. What happens when you mix instability with intoxication? And what inconsistencies do you see in Ms. Testa's story and in the prosecution's theory of what happened that night? Good afternoon, members of the jury. My name is Morgan Barham, and I, along with my co-counsel Monica Bracey, represent the defendant, Peter Paul Seeger. Mr. Seeger is a hard-working young man who was born and raised right here in Lone Star. He currently works in construction and is known as the neighborhood-friendly handyman, always helping others out. In fact, he met the love of his life, Miss Adriana Testa, while working on a job in the community. He'll tell you that when they first met, it was love at first sight. He took her in, he took care of her, and the two never fought. That is, until the night of June 14th, 2014. On that day, the evidence will show that Mr. Seeger was at home with his girlfriend, Miss Testa. She was drinking before work, and Mr. Seeger decided he wanted to make the home more permanent, more reflective of the relationship. So he went to the storage unit that day, and he got his grandmother's fine china and his favorite piece of art, a velvet painting of the king himself, Mr. Elvis Presley, to hang on the living room wall. He thought it would spruce up the house, add a little flavor. So he got out his supplies, ready to hang the picture, but before he ever got the chance to even try and hang that picture, Miss Testa began to scream at him. She told him that if he hung that picture, she would call the police and lie, saying that Mr. Seeger hit her. All over a velvet Elvis painting. Members of the jury, that is when Miss Testa began to show her instability, and that is when her instability and her intoxication began to lead to an inconsistent story. Now, thinking she was just drunk and exaggerating, Mr. Seeger attempted to hang the picture. He got out his supplies, he was lining it up and marking on the wall where to hang it, but you'll see that Miss Testa responded to this by running out the front door, screaming that she had been hit. And Mr. Seeger followed after her, trying to make sure she was okay, trying to protect her. Now, the state may try and draw attention to the fact that Mr. Seeger had a hammer in his hand when he followed her, but Pete himself will take the stand and explain to you how he didn't have time to think about setting down the hammer, how he was more concerned with making sure that Miss Testa was okay. And still in shock over what had just happened, he went back into the trailer, unsure of what to do. Luckily, a neighbor, Jordan Kravitz, saw everything that happened, and he called the police, not because he thought anything criminal had happened, but because he saw Miss Testa needed help after falling repeatedly. And it was that neighbor who saw what really happened, who saw that Mr. Seeger never hit his girlfriend, that he was just trying to protect her, just trying to keep her safe. Now, despite evidence of her instability and despite evidence of her intoxication, the state is going along with Ms. Testa's claims that Mr. Seeger hit her, and they are charging him with assault and criminal domestic violence, two very serious charges based on inconsistencies. And today, you will see those inconsistencies in the state's case and in Ms. Testa's story. Today, it is the state who bears the burden of proof. That means they have to prove to you each and every element of all their claims beyond a reasonable doubt. That means to prove assault to you, they must prove that Mr. Seeger acted with intent to cause serious bodily injury, that he caused serious bodily injury, and that he did so by use of a deadly weapon. They must prove all of these beyond a reasonable doubt. Further, to prove that Mr. Seeger committed domestic violence, they must prove that he committed that assault against Ms. Testa and that he did so while in an intimate relationship with her at that time. Again, beyond a reasonable doubt. Beyond a reasonable doubt means that there is no other reasonable explanation for what may have happened. That the only way to explain Ms. Testa's injuries is assault by Mr. Seeger. But today, we expect the evidence to show you that there are many reasonable alternatives to her story and to the prosecution's theory. Today, we expect the evidence to show that Ms. Testa was intoxicated and running around a trailer park at night. Today, we expect the evidence to show that Ms. Testa was never hit by a hammer or by Mr. Seeger. Now, keep in mind that we have no burden of proof. And this is because there's a presumption of innocence in our system. That means I don't have to prove to you or explain to you exactly what happened that night. That is the job of the state. And because of all the instability and intoxication, we expect there to be many inconsistencies in their case today. To try and prove their point, they will call two witnesses. They will call Ms. Testa, the alleged victim. Now, while she's on the stand, I want you to keep in mind some questions. What signs of instability do you see? What happens when you mix that instability with intoxication? And what inconsistencies might this have caused? Next, they will call Dr. Derek Shepard, the medical doctor who saw Ms. Testa that night at the hospital. During his testimony, ask yourselves, what did his test reveal about her intoxication and her instability? And what did he do that might have led to any inconsistencies in his conclusions about her injuries? Now, after the state presents their case, we will have our own opportunity. But keep in mind, we have no burden. We will only call witnesses to show you the inconsistencies in the state's case. First, we will call Mr. Seeger, the defendant. He will be waiving his right to remain silent by taking the stand and explaining to you what really happened that night. He will explain to you Ms. Testa's instability and intoxication on the night of June 14th, 2014. Next, we will call Jordan Kravitz, the eyewitness who saw everything outside of his home. And he will tell you the inconsistencies in Ms. Testa's story and the prosecution's theory. Now, members of the jury, you have a tough job today, but with a single objective, and that objective is justice. So ask yourselves, is justice built on inconsistencies? That's why I'm asking you now, and my co-counsel will ask you again at the end of today's trial, to return the only verdict the evidence will support. Find Mr. Seeger not guilty. Thank you.